This is the Scorp Mini, which is a 4-in-1 gimbal designed at the lighter side of cameras, for example your phone, your GoPro, APS-C cameras, and also a little bit of full frame cameras, and we'll get into that shortly. There's been a bunch of great videos that go through every single feature this gimbal has, which is great and all, but I want to focus on the positives and the negatives that really affect me, someone who is a vertical shooter, really run and gun, has a bit more of a focus on TikTok and Instagram short form media, and I'm going to list the main good and bad for this gimbal and not go through all of those specs. If you want those specs, have a look at these videos. So just a quick disclaimer, Feiyu sent me this gimbal, but I'm not afraid to share my true honest opinions. For example, when I trashed the GoPro 11 in this review up here. So the first benefit when looking at the Scorp Mini is that when balancing anything on the lighter range, it always works great. You can really expect these with these type of gimbals. However, it's when we push these small gimbals to balance full frame cameras and anything that's a bit heavier, a bit bulkier, then we really see a difference. And I'm pleased to say the Scorp Mini did a great job. So the payload on the Scorp Mini is 1.2 kilograms, which is a fair amount considering the setups of a A7IV and a bigger lens. And I tried to test this with the A7IV and the 24mm f1.4. All in all, that's about 1.1 kilos. I'm filming with the A7IV right now, but because there's not that much room in this gimbal, you can't really balance it perfectly. So even though I wasn't fully able to balance the Sony A7IV on this gimbal due to the higher eyepiece and the 24mm lens ruining the balance, so you had to move it back a bit and basically it didn't fit, I was still able to use the gimbal fairly seamlessly because the motors pack quite a punch and we're able to get some pretty seamless shots that I'm sure you'll be seeing right now. So in regards to heavier full frame camera setups, as long as we get to the weight around 1.1 kilos, I think you are basically safe to go. When you are using a heavier setup, you have either two options: either balance everything perfectly and then the tilt axis is going to catch at this point. For example, you have a big camera, it'll catch and won't be able to fully go to this point, which means you won't be able to properly use the, I don't know what this is called, but the mode where you hold the camera like this, which is pretty key in my opinion. So that's one option. Or the second option is you just put it slightly off balance and the tilt axis won't be perfectly balanced, and you basically pray that the motors are strong enough to compensate for the poor balancing in the tilt axis. But you can basically push the gimbal as much as you can, and I personally didn't find that many issues using that 1.1 kilo setup, so that is definitely a positive. I think another benefit is generally for someone who wants to use a wide range of content creation tools, for example small cameras, the Sony A7IV, having this gimbal will really just cover everything. You can get the occasional full frame shots and also a bunch of other shots to be silky smooth. Obviously, if you're someone running a huge lens and even the same setup as me, if you're going to use that on a gimbal all day long, you might as well just buy the Scorp C, which can handle it, or a bigger gimbal. So in general, don't really expect that this gimbal will be able to carry every full frame camera and every lens combination. But if you want that one size fits all solution, this is basically as close as it gets. And if you're someone like me who doesn't use full frame gimbal shots on an everyday basis, then this will perfectly do the job. So moving on to another positive, the ergonomics of this gimbal is basically top notch. It has basically every other feature that every other gimbal uses for this very low price, which we'll also get to later. The locking mechanisms work great. The touchscreen also does wonders and it's super easy to use. We also have this knob here which we can customize, and there are a bunch of different features that the software allows that just let you produce content outside of the regular norm. For example, the hyperlapses, the time-lapse options. It's really great to see these features in a gimbal, especially not just conforming to getting stable shots all the time. I think also having all those cables to connect this USB port to your camera so you can control all the settings via the buttons here is also great. That's pretty standard these days. I think another amazing feature of this gimbal is that you can actually just grab this and just point it wherever you like and the gimbal will conform to that. Let's try and get a nice close-up there. I can just point this wherever I like and the gimbal will just accept my user input and go there, which is extremely handy, and I don't think any other gimbal can do that, and every gimbal should allow for that. Alright, so the final positive is the price, and if you watch this channel, you know I care about your money. This gimbal will retail for $299. I'll just keep that price there because there are Kickstarters that have way cheaper options. But the closest competitor to this gimbal is the Zhiyun M3. And although this gimbal is cheaper than the Zhiyun M3, there really isn't anything that you are losing out on when comparing this to the Zhiyun M3. This can actually handle more weight in some certain setups compared to Zhiyun M3. And that alone is a reason why you should buy this instead of the Zhiyun M3. So unless there's a massive Zhiyun M3 sale, the value in this bad boy is incredible and is definitely worth a buy in my opinion. And now moving on to the negatives of this camera. camera. There's really nothing else you could ask more from it. Maybe supporting a payload of 1.4 kilos, 1.5 kilos, so you can get away with not balancing the gimbal perfectly. Using a bigger full frame setup, that would be even nicer. But given the cheap price tag, you really can't fault Feiyu Tech for getting a product that is this good. Another negative is that the app is a little bit redundant in my opinion. You can basically accomplish everything you can in this gimbal itself. Alright, so another negative of this gimbal is when I was using portrait mode, and as you may know, I really go hard on the TikToks and Reels. Check out my Instagram, give that a follow. But as you can see, the gimbal takes this shape and we kind of hold it as a spear and we try to record anything vertically. And the issue with this is that if I'm filming, I can't really see my viewfinder of what I'm actually filming, so it's really easy for you to just get off your target and off your subject, which is obviously not ideal when you're trying to get some cinematic shots. Additionally, you can only use FPV mode in vertical shooting. Keep in mind, a lot of people won't even have these complaints because they don't use as much vertical video as I do. But physically, it probably isn't possible to have a vertical view that doesn't obstruct like this. For example, if the view was vertical here, that would be nice, but I don't think that's possible. I think another negative that doesn't really apply to this gimbal in particular, but just the general light gimbal setup, is that the stabilization on GoPros and iPhones already work great these days, so it's hard to justify in some senses to even use a gimbal for those clips. Here's an example of me using the GoPro on this gimbal. And just off the top of my head, a few reasons why we would actually use these small cameras on this small gimbal is that it will deliver the same handheld shot with half the effort. Additionally, when using something like the iPhone, the image does crop in a slight bit, about 2mm in focal length. So if you use this gimbal, you can turn that option off and therefore get more field of view, which would be great. Additionally, with these small cameras, when using stabilization, once you get below that 1/60th of a second, that's when we get too much motion blur. And basically how the algorithms work is that they try and move the image around so that it can stabilize, but if you have motion blur that moves everywhere, the shot will look weird. So you can finally use ND filters on these small cameras because the software stabilization won't ruin 1/60th of a second footage. But as you can imagine, these are very niche cases and the large majority of people probably won't need gimbals for these smaller devices. So I say that as a negative, but there are still definitely use cases for a gimbal on a small camera, but it may not just apply to that many people. Another thing is that when I power the button on, there are times I hear the sounds that it's starting and then it doesn't stabilize properly. I think that's because I haven't properly balanced the gimbal, so the motors might be freaking out a little bit, so that's probably on me. And overall, that is basically all the negatives I can think of. I think if this was somehow able to support those lighter full frame cameras like the Sony A7IV, that would be my dream come true. But the gimbal can already basically do that, and maybe a better vertical mode, but I guess I might be the only one asking for that. So overall, this is an extremely solid gimbal that I would recommend people to buy. It is the cheapest product that gives you all the features. And if you get on Kickstarter now, it's even cheaper than that. I will definitely be using this gimbal in the future as it's super lightweight, easy to carry around, great for traveling. So with that being said, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you got something, show some support, and I'll catch you in the next one.